Hey everybody, I'm Lisa Brennan.
And I'm Justin Trice.
Welcome to Crime of the Arts, a true crime podcast that peeks behind the curtain to shine a light on the dark and untold truths of the creative arts.
From film set mysteries to celebrity murders and art heist, these two theater nerds will usher you into the unknown.
Oh, no. God, we're annoying. Why are you all here? So this week, I am going to tell you about a murder at the Dakota, the killing of John Lennon. I took it on, folks. It's a heavy lift.
She did. I can't wait to hear this. We all know about John Lennon, but I want to hear this. And today I'll be talking about what we'll call the Spider-Man art heist.
Oh, I had no idea. Spider-Man art heist. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, I'll go first. I feel like John Lennon should be able to go without introduction. But alas, this is what we do on this podcast here. So.
Because some of y'all are too fucking young. You're youngsters. You're whippersnappers.
He transcends generations. So. John Lennon was born October 9th, 1940 in Liverpool, UK. By 1957, Lennon had met Paul McCartney and George Harrison, and they started to play music together. After several name changes, the group became known as the Beatles. Following the replacement of drummer Pete Best by Ringo Starr in 1962, the group released their first single, beginning a long musical career that would lead to them becoming one of the most acclaimed bands of all time. The Beatles weren't just pop stars. They were experimented with music, fashion, drugs, and religion in a way that had far-reaching effects. Your favorite band wouldn't be able to do half the things they were able to do in 2022 if it hadn't been for the way the Beatles had shaken up the world in the 1960s.
There you go.
I'm not going to give you a history of the Beatles because if you don't know, then I cannot fucking help you. You have made a conscious decision to not know who the Beatles are, and you're stupid. So they are arguably the greatest band of all time. You could come fight me for it. I'm ready.
You can go fight her for it. And for those of you, for some reason, that's not familiar with the Beatles, we mentioned before Julie Tabor's Spider-Man Into the Dark musical. Mm-hmm. She was known for a film called Across the Universe, where it just takes all of the Beatles music and it spans it across this phantasmical visual story. An
entire story. Yes. Justin hates it. I love it. We will die on this hill together. Yes.
But at least I will recommend that y'all check it out so you can hear some cool fucking renditions of their music.
Oh. Well,
hell has frozen over, right?
Hell has frozen over. Yes, sir. Okay. After the Beatles disbanded, John Lennon stayed in the public eye with his solo music career, collaborative efforts with his wife Yoko Ono, and political activism for peaceful causes. Lennon's work was characterized by the rebellious nature and acerbic wit of his music, writing, and drawings on film and in interviews. My dad actually has a replica of a John Lennon painting, and it's fucking beautiful. It's on an easel in his room. Listen, I am a Beatles fan generationally. I was brought up a certain way.
She was raised in it.
Yeah, man. When John Lennon was brutally murdered at just 40 years old on the steps outside of his home in New York, a whole generation was stunned. What happened and who would commit such a terrible crime? What is particularly tragic about John Lennon's death is that the star had just embarked on his return to the music business after a 5-year hiatus. So in 1975, his contract with EMI had ended with a greatest hits compilation, and the Beatles company Apple was finally dissolved the following year, meaning that Lennon had no commitments to any record company. For the first time ever, he was free. And for a time, he stepped away from the show business. He took care of his newly born son named Sean, who arrived in October 1975. And in July 76, Lennon finally got his green card, which allowed him to stay in the U.S. as a permanent resident. So now that he was able to come and go as he pleased, he left the U.S. and traveled to Tokyo to visit relatives with his wife, Yoko Ono. In the summer of 1980, as Sean was about to turn 5 years old, which is kind of the golden age when, you are like, okay, I can bring my life back to myself when you're a parent. Lennon began to write songs again, and he spent time in Bermuda working on new music. With his creative juices flowing, John had written enough songs for 2 new albums. So John and Yoko planned a record that would showcase both of their musical ideas, and the album that was to become Double Fantasy was recorded in New York's Hit Factory studios between August and October of 1980. So the first single from the album was Just Like Starting Over, which had a 1950s vibe and a reflective lyric. But John Lennon was back. You know, the single was well received. And while the accompanying album was considered by some critics to be middle-aged self-indulgence, Beatles fans were happy to see their hero back on the charts once again, competing with his old sparring partner, Paul McCartney. You know, there's a lot of warring about Yoko Ono breaking up the Beatles and blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, they all wanted to go do their own thing. These are like mastermind musicians at a minimum. So Paul McCartney is another story I think I brought up before that I'll tap on one day. It's a conspiracy theory that's pretty wild. I'll get there. It's pretty cool. It's not a story at all, but one day I will tackle it. It just seems like a really big lift for me. So, of course, the media was curious about what Lennon had been up to during his hiatus, and the ex-Beatle gave a number of interviews. Press interest in Lennon was still at a high as Christmas approached, and Lennon and Oko took part in a photo shoot with Annie Leibovitz, Rolling Stone magazine photographer. So she actually came to their apartment at the Dakota building, just opposite Central Park. And it's actually a very famous set of photos of them together, mostly because it was just hours before his death. You know, What are the chances of that actually all lining up that way? Of all the days for the Rolling Stone to send a photographer, it's this day.
Exactly, yeah. No, the odds are astronomical, and the fact that it happened, yeah. Cruel
and
fate.
Yeah, and I don't know if you have ever seen the photos, but it was supposed to be them nude together, but she didn't want to be nude, so he was nude, like hanging on her, and it was supposed to be this cover of Rolling Stone magazine. Like that was the intent, was to show them back. But, you know, the whole world changed. After the shoot, Lennon and Ono then gave an interview to a San Francisco DJ named Dave Sholin, and in the chat, Lennon claimed that he had been excited to play his new music live, having never really properly toured as a solo artist. After the radio interview ended, John and Yoko left the Dakota around 5 p.m. for the Hit Factory, a recording studio situated just across town. Yoko had recorded a song called Walking on Thin Ice, which acknowledged the new wave bands like the B-52s that could be heard in New York's trendier nightclubs. And the purpose of the session was to mix that record because John wanted to release it just before Christmas.
Right.
So as the couple left the Dakota, they walked through the usual gaggle of fans that had started to congregate around the building on the Upper West Side of New York City. And ever since John became like a public figure again, this is part of their daily routine. One of the fans offered a copy of the new album, Double Fantasy, to Lennon, and he signed it happily. That fan was named Mark David Chapman.
Okay.
So Mark David Chapman was born in Texas in 1980. He lived in Hawaii with his wife, Gloria. He was 25 years old. And he'd been a Beatles fan since he was a teenager, but was a born-again Christian and was angered by Lennon's claim that in 1966, the Liverpool band were more popular than Jesus, quote unquote. It's a very infamous quote that he said in an interview.
Everyone knows that quote.
Yeah. Chapman's animosity towards the musician intensified once John started to appear in the media again in 1980. This is a mental health issue, straight from the jump. If he's harboring terrible feelings from 1966 to 1980 about a person he doesn't know, about a thing that he just believes is real, this is a mental health issue. Chapman couldn't understand that the man who preached all you need is love is now living as a millionaire in New York. Sounds kind of jealous.
Yeah, there's some hater vibes on that.
Yeah, it's all really strangely unwarranted. You know what I mean? Like it's not justifiable to me, at least. So on October 27th, 1980, Chapman purchased a 5-shot 38 caliber Charter Arms revolver in Honolulu. He flew to New York on October 29th after contacting the FAA to learn the best way to transport a revolver. And he learned that bullets can be damaged on a plane, so he arrived without ammunition. Then he left New York on the 12th or 13th of November, and he flew back December 6th. And he checked into an Upper West Side YMCA for one night and then moved to a Sheraton hotel in Midtown Manhattan. It's amazing to talk about like the idea of contacting the FAA to be like, how do I bring my gun on a plane?
Yeah, seriously.
Pre 9/11.
I don't want to damage the bullets.
And they're like, oh, well, bullets kind of may explode on a plane. So like, maybe don't do that. It's fascinating how different the world was. So Chapman waited outside John Lennon's Dakota apartment in the early morning, and he spent most of the day near the entrance of the Dakota talking to other fans and the doorman. And during that morning, he was distracted, and he seemed to have missed seeing John Lennon step out of a cab and enter the building. Later the same morning, he met John Lennon's family nanny, Helen Seaman, and she was returning from a walk with his 5-year-old son, Sean. Now, this part makes me cringe. Chapman reached in front of the housekeeper to shake Sean's hand and say that he was a beautiful boy, quoting Lennon's song, Beautiful Boy, Darling Boy. And just the idea that this like murderer had the ability to get that close to his child.
His son, yeah.
Makes me nauseous. So like I said earlier, Lennon and Ono left the Dakota and they were approached by Chapman, who asked for Lennon's autograph. And Lennon liked to give autographs or pictures, especially for those who had been waiting for long periods of time to meet him. And later, Chapman was interviewed, and he said, he was very kind to me. Ironically, very kind and was very patient with me. The limousine was waiting, and he took his time with me, and he got the pen going, and he signed my album, and he asked me if I needed anything else. And I said, no, sir. And he walked away. Very cordial and decent man. This is prior to his actions. This is earlier in the day.
Fucking wild.
So Paul Goresh, an amateur photographer and Lennon fan, was outside the building, and he actually took a photograph of the two of them together. You could see it. I might even put it as our cover. No, I don't want to give him any FaceTime. There is a photograph of Lennon and Chapman side by side, like smiling, and he's signing the album.
That's crazy.
The Lennons returned to the Dakota at approximately 10:50 p.m. that night, and John wanted to say goodnight to his son before going to the Stage Deli restaurant with Yoko Ono. So they exited their limousine on 72nd Street instead of driving into the more secure courtyard of the Dakota, and they passed Chapman and walked towards the archway entrance of the building. And as Ono passed, Chapman nodded at her, and as Lennon passed by, he glanced briefly at Chapman, appearing to recognize him from earlier in the day, and seconds later, Chapman drew his gun, which was concealed in his coat pocket, and aimed it at the center of Lennon's back, and rapidly fired 5 hollow point bullets from a distance of about 9 to 10 feet.
Damn.
So hollow point bullets are a flex, and that's a decision. You know, they do serious damage. So based on statements made that night by the NYPD Chief of Detectives James Sullivan, numerous reports at the time claimed that Chapman called out Mr. Lennon and dropped into like a combat firing stance. Later court hearings and witness interviews did not include these details, but Chapman said that he doesn't remember calling out to him before he fired and that Lennon did not turn around, which makes sense if he shot him in the back.
Exactly.
He claimed that he did take a combat stance, though, in a 1992 interview with Barbara Walters, which, Barbara Walters, you are garbage. Why are we interviewing this piece of shit?
For the ratings. You already know why she did it.
So, one bullet missed Lennon and struck a window of the Dakota. According to an autopsy report, 2 bullets entered the left side of his back, traveling through the left side of his chest and his left lung, with 1 exiting from the body and 1 lodging in his neck. 2 more bullets hit Lennon in his left shoulder, and he bled profusely from his external wounds and from his mouth, staggering up 5 steps to the security area where he said, I'm shot, and he fell to the floor, scattering cassette tapes that he was carrying. So the imagery and how much detail people were able to give in this story, it really paints a picture. Jose Perdermo is the doorman of the Dakota, and he actually shook the gun out of Chapman's hand and kicked it across the pavement. And a concierge named Jay Hastings first started to make a tourniquet to try and help John, but upon ripping open his blood-stained shirt, he realized the severity of his injuries, and he just covered Lennon's chest with his uniform jacket and removed his blood-stained glasses and called the police. And Yoko Ono is here for all of this. Keep that in mind. She's present in the room. So Chapman removed his coat and hat to show that he was not carrying any concealed weapons and remained standing on West 72nd Street waiting for the police to arrive. Perdomo shouted at Chapman, "Do you know what you just did?" To which Chapman calmly replied, "I just shot John Lennon."
He just said it nonchalant. I just shot John Lennon.
Yep.
Shit.
Officers Stephen Spiro and Peter Cullen were the first policemen to arrive at the scene. They were at the 72nd Street and Broadway corner when they heard reports of shots fired at the Dakota. The officers arrived about 2 minutes later and found Chapman standing very calmly on the corner reading a paperback copy of J.D. Salinger's Catcher in the Rye. Have you ever read Catcher in the Rye?
I did. I have. And I'll never forget this part of the story in general, because I'm just like, if you weren't aware this man had mental issues after he calmly said, I just shot John Lennon. Now, I mean,
he's just reading a book.
Yeah.
Well, I never read Catcher in the Rye in like high school, you know, when they make you read books. I feel like my school didn't do that. So I read Catcher in the Rye like as a choice, as an avid reader. And it's one of my favorite books. I think it's an amazing book. It's very crazy how that art form is something that can be turned into something that's like weaponized the way that they do that with music and video games and all these other things. It's so intense. I was reading someone's critique of how this book in particular has played into multiple, like the assassination attempt on, was it Reagan was right after this? And they also quoted Catcher in the Rye. The two police officers who showed up immediately put Chapman in handcuffs and placed him in the back seat of their squad car. And Chapman made no attempt to flee or resist arrest. And Cullen said of Chapman that he apologized to us for ruining our night. And I turned around to him and I said, you've got to be fucking kidding me. You're worried about our night? Do you know what you just did to your life?
Do you know who you just killed? Like, do you have any idea the icon, the cultural impact of the person you just killed? And you're like, I'm sorry, folks, for ruining your night.
Yeah. Well, and he ruined his own life and the life of his wife and his family. He's infamous now. And he said that they decided to read him his rights more than once. Like, just to fucking be sure.
Just to make sure he understood, yeah.
That they had everything straight. Officer Herb, oh boy, Herb, Fraunenberger, and his partner Tony Palma. Yeah, that's a rough one. Fraunenberger. They were the second team to arrive at the crime scene, and they found Lennon lying face down on the floor of the reception area, blood pouring out of his mouth. His clothes were already soaked through, and Hastings was attempting to tend to him. Officers James Moran and Bill Gamble then arrived on the scene, and Fraunenberger put Lennon in his squad car, concluding that his condition was too serious to wait for an ambulance, and they were going to drive him to Roosevelt Hospital on West 59th Street, followed by the other officers, with Yoko Ono in the car.
Even trying to move him with all those bullets left in him and the damage. Anytime you move that body, those bullets are shredding around in there.
More damage, yeah.
Yeah.
So according to Gamble in the car, Moran asks, are you John Lennon? Or do you know who you are? Like, he was also in shock. And the reports say that Lennon just nodded, but could only manage a moaning sound as he tried to speak, and he lost consciousness shortly after that. So a few minutes before 11 p.m., Moran arrived at Roosevelt Hospital with Lennon in a squad car, and he was carrying Lennon on his back and onto a gurney, demanding a doctor for multiple gunshot wound victim. When Lennon was brought in, he was not breathing, and he had no pulse. 3 doctors and a nurse and 2 or 3 other medical attendants worked on Lennon for 10 to 20 minutes in an attempt to resuscitate him. As a last resort, the doctors cut open Lennon's chest and attempted to manually massage his heart to restore circulation.
Yeah.
But they quickly discovered that the damage to the blood vessels above and around Lennon's heart from the multiple bullet wounds was too great. Stephen Lynn is the head of emergency department at Roosevelt Hospital, said that if John Lennon had been shot that way in the middle of the operating room with a whole team of surgeons ready to work on him, he still wouldn't have survived his injuries.
Exactly. I'm surprised he survived as long as he did. Because,
right.
I mean, he was shot up. He crawled to the steps. They've covered him. They brought him in the hotel. Cops eventually come. They take him out.
We're looking at like a good 5 minutes, probably.
Yeah.
You know, if we're looking at real time, between the time that he was shot and the time that he was in that car, it's probably 5 minutes. Like, it's not that long of a time, but that's a long time to be dying.
That's a long time to be bleeding out and your, arteries, everything's already destroyed up there. Oh my goodness.
So sad. So 3 of the 4 bullets that struck Lennon's back passed completely through his body and out of his chest, while the 4th lodged itself in his aorta beside his heart. One of the exiting bullets from his chest hit and became lodged in his upper left arm, and several wounds could have been fatal by themselves because each bullet had ruptured vital arteries around the heart. So he was shot 4 times at close range with hollow point bullets, and his affected organs, particularly his left lung and major blood vessels above his heart, were virtually destroyed upon impact. Information regarding who operated on and attempted to resuscitate Lennon was varied. This is something I didn't know before I did this research. Stephen Lynn, who's the head of emergency at Roosevelt Hospital, is usually credited with performing Lennon's surgery.
Okay.
But in 2005, Lynn said he massaged Lennon's heart and attempted to resuscitate him for 20 minutes, and that 2 other doctors were present, and that the 3 of them declared Lennon's death. So that's 2005. We're talking about 1980.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Richard Marks, an emergency room surgeon, stated in 1990 that he operated on Lennon, administered a massive blood transfusion, and provided heart massage to no avail. And he said, when I realized he wasn't going to make it, I just sewed him back up. I felt helpless.
Fuck. We got a lot of surgeons. Who's the real one?
Right.
Or is it all of them? I mean, a collective effort. Again, he had already lost a lot of blood, but yeah.
Hold on. David Halloran, who had been a third-year general surgery resident at Roosevelt Hospital, disputed the accounts of both Marks and Lynn. In 2015, Halloran stated that the 2 doctors didn't do anything, and that he did not initially realize the identity of the victim, and he added that Lynn only came in to assist him when he heard that it was John Lennon.
Wow.
So what is real? I mean, listen, if you didn't do anything because you knew there's nothing you could do, then why glorify yourself in the idea that you hand massaged his heart and it's John? You know, it's all ugly to me.
Or is it you could have done something, but because you thought it was a nobody, you didn't take the time to do something. And as a result, we lost time.
And then you were like, oh, fuck, it's John Lennon. And then everybody came in, even the head of fucking emergency surgery.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, maybe. According to his death certificate, Lennon was pronounced dead on arrival at 11:15 p.m. Witnesses noted that the Beatles song All My Loving came on over the hospital's sound system at the moment Lennon was pronounced dead. Isn't that an interesting tidbit? It's one of my favorite songs. So his body was taken to the city morgue at 521st Avenue for an autopsy. And the cause of death was reported on his death certificate as hypovolemic shock caused by the loss of more than 80% of blood volume due to multiple through and through gunshot wounds. 80%.
Oh, I believe it. The moment you said he passed out in a car, I was like, he's gone into shock. That's it.
Yeah. Yoko Ono asked the hospital not to report to the media that her husband was dead until she informed her 5-year-old son, Sean, who was at home. Ono said he was probably watching television and she didn't want him to learn about his father's death from a TV announcement. However, news producer Alan J. Weiss of WABC TV happened to be waiting for treatment at the Roosevelt Hospital emergency room after being injured in a motorcycle crash earlier in the evening. Police officers wheeled Lennon into the same room as Weiss and mentioned what happened. And what does he fucking do? Calls his station and relay the information.
Wow.
ABC News president Rooney Arledge received word of the death during the last few moments of a Monday night football game between the Patriots and the Miami Dolphins. And he informed Frank Gifford and Howard Cosell of the shooting and suggested they report the murder. Cosell had interviewed John Lennon during a Monday night football broadcast in '74. And he was chosen to be the one to do the sharing.
Jeez. Oh, my goodness.
But he balked at being the one to deliver that news. But Gifford convinced Cosell otherwise, saying, you've got to. If you know it, you've got to do it. Don't hang on it. It's a tragic moment, and this is going to shake up the whole world. So they did. Per Ono's wishes, on December 14th, millions of people around the world paused for 10 minutes of silence to remember Lennon, including 30,000 people gathering at his home in Liverpool and 225,000 people at the Naumburg bandshell in Central Park. Close to the scene of the shooting is that bandshell, and for 10 minutes, every radio station in New York City went off the air. At least 3 Beatles fans committed suicide after the murder, leading Ono to make a public appeal asking mourners not to give in to the despair. And on January 18th, 1981, a full-page open letter from her appeared in the New York Times and the Washington Post, titled Ingratitude, and it expressed thanks to millions of people who mourned Lennon's loss and wanted to know how they could commemorate his life and help her and Sean.
Okay.
The attempted assassination of Ronald Reagan by John Hinckley took place 3 months after Lennon's murder, and the police also found a copy of Catcher in the Rye among his personal belongings. And he left a cassette tape in his hotel room on which he stated that he mourned Lennon's death. And he said that he wanted to make some kind of statement after Lennon's death.
Didn't Taxi Driver inspire him as well? He was obsessed with Jodie Foster. Yeah. Damn. I didn't know about the Catcher in the Rye aspect, though, and the John Lennon aspect, but
yeah,
crazy.
So in June 2016, Jay Hastings, the Dakota doorman who tried to help John Lennon, sold the shirt he was wearing that night, which was stained with John Lennon's blood at an auction, for $42,500.
First off,
the fuck?
I am shocked that he chose to do that. It seemed like I was thinking you're going to tell me in 2016 this person died, but you're like, no, he sold the shirt. Why, after all of these years, did you decide to do that?
Times are hard, bro.
And also, again, don't do crime and don't exploit people. Don't exploit people, folks. But
it's ugly.
Why, if you're gonna do that? Not that you should.
Why wait so long?
You only got 42. Yeah, well, why wait so long, and why did you only get 42,000 for it?
Right.
That probably could have sold for at least 1.2 mil, but still, I'm not saying you should have sold it. That's just crazy. And why did you wait so long? Was he like a young adult when he was the doorman, and now he's just an old man with medical problems?
Yeah, maybe. Who fucking knows? But like, it's gross. It's a gross act. It's so hard because I guess DNA didn't really do as much back then, but like now what you could do with John Lennon's DNA, who fucking knows?
Exactly. And who bought that? Do you know who bought that? That was gonna be my next question. Nope. I'm like, yeah, who knows what you could do science wise?
Yeah, it's just really trippy to me. And then that's like blood that's so many years old by 2016. Like what did he take his shirt off and like preserve it? Why did no one from Lennon's team come knock on his fucking door and be like, give me your shirt for 10 grand and let's call it a day? Because you don't want these things to kind of happen, I
personally would have burnt that shirt. That's just too much bad
trauma,
juju, right? Trauma. Yeah, no.
So the day after he was murdered, he was cremated at Ferncliff Cemetery in Hartsdale, Westchester County, New York, and his ashes were scattered in Central Park in sight of their apartment. Have you been to his memorial, Strawberry Fields in Central Park? Do you imagine?
I've seen it. Yeah.
It's very powerful, and every time I've gone there, there's just flowers all over it. It's the coolest thing that all these years later, he still affects people. He's so prolific. So Chapman was taken to the 20th precinct on West 82nd Street, where he was questioned for 8 hours before being brought to New York City County Criminal Court in Lower Manhattan. And a judge remanded Chapman to Bellevue Hospital for a psychiatric evaluation. And I don't have it in here, but he was like relentlessly questioned by doctors to try and figure out his psychiatric state, right, and whether he was suitable to sit trial. And they found him to be a schizophrenic.
Makes sense.
But he was charged with second-degree murder. So despite advice by his lawyers to plead insanity, he pled guilty for murdering Lennon, saying that his guilty plea was the will of God. And under the terms of his guilty plea, he was sentenced to 20 years to life with eligibility for parole in 2000. Before his sentencing, he was given the opportunity to address the court, at which point he read a passage from Catcher in the Rye. And as of September 2022, he has been denied parole 12 times. And remains incarcerated at Greenhaven Correctional Facility. And he should stay there until he dies, in my opinion.
Again, man, I'm impressed that they gave him 20 to life. The moment you said the whole thing about he felt it was the will of God, man, I was like, that's brilliant on his part, because I thought that was a manipulation to where they're going to be like, he's clearly insane. Just throw him in the... But no, they got him. They got it right. They got it right for once.
Yeah, I mean, when you plead guilty, why are we wasting any more money?
Yeah.
To further, you need to be institutionalized, or you need to be in prison, or you need to be kept away from the public. There was another part of the article that I read that I didn't put in here, but he talked about in some of his interviews how when he first met him earlier in the day, he was like excited because he was a Beatles fan. And he almost didn't even go through with it. And then he sat there all day and he met his kid and he did all these things, and it just compounded in his, whatever was pissing him off about all of it. And he just decided to do it. It's so crazy, because he could have made a choice to not. And the whole world would have been a completely different place. I mean, 40 years old. Think about, we're almost 40. Like the amount of time between then and now of what John Lennon could have done to the world is incredible. He could have failed us all. I mean, there could have been garbage moments.
I was just thinking that I was like, I don't know if I want to say this, but I was like, what if ultimately, because he had lived, his legacy
would have been tarnished in some way.
Yeah.
He would have Kanye'd himself right into a fucking hole.
Right.
But I want to believe that he would have been even further a monumental icon in the world, like Paul McCartney. You know, like who doesn't love Paul McCartney? My dad is in his 60s and he still buys every fucking ticket to a Paul McCartney concert if he's anywhere near where he lives. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's amazing. It's amazing. So, the death of John Lennon on December 8th, 1980 remains the most appalling moments in the long history of rock music. And we've lost a lot of great musicians over the years, but it's rare for a star to be murdered. And it's even rarer that the musician that has been killed is someone who has as much influence in society, music, art, and culture as John Lennon did.
Right.
That is the story of the murder at the Dakota. And it is the story of the death of John Lennon.
Again, I thought I knew that story, but there was a lot of details in there that I was not familiar with between the disputing doctors and just he met the son.
But yeah, sorry, I wrote that story and it seemed really long, but I feel like when I told it to you, it wasn't as long as
I was just about to say to you. I was like, there was nothing long about that story. It was like 20, 30 minutes, if that. Like your story directly, the banter adds to it. But it wasn't long at all. I was
Justin,
confused.
It was 22 pages I wrote.
Oh, damn.
It's longer than most stories that I write, but I guess, it's hard to find the levity in that story where we can make fun of things because it's all sad and shitty and traumatic.
I know. So if I seemed quiet, it's why because I was just taking it all in because that was just like, what the fuck? He shared
his story, and his son was 75, so he's 10 years. He's older than his dad now. Well, so that's all I got.
All right. Well. That was a hell of a story.
Yeah. It had to be done. Let me introduce you to a few new friends of ours.
I'm Raven Rollins, and this is my Southern True Crime podcast where I discuss cases from my former hometown. Ada, Oklahoma paints itself as an average community, but its history of murder and corruption runs deeper than any story has ever told. You'll hear plenty of special guests, including authors and experts in their fields, who visit with me on each episode, as well as other cases in the southern states. With notorious and unknown cases alike, every victim sees the light on my show. This is Sirens, a true crime podcast.
Okay, so tell me about a Spider-Man art heist, because I don't have one freaking clue what this is.
Yeah, so the Spider-Man art heist, when you say that out loud, what do you envision? Like for me personally, I might envision Tobey Maguire like punching someone in the face and taking like a signed autograph back. That's not what this is though, but that's what I...
Okay, mine's ridiculous because mine is like the room with the laser beams, phew, 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 and he's like, dun, dun. It's very like Mission Impossible and he's clinging to the walls and shit to get through the laser beams. Am I... No.
You might be within the realm. It might not be lasers, but I mean, stay tuned, folks. We got some crazy shit for you today.
Stay tuned. Okay.
But yeah, I want to talk to y'all about what is known as the infamous Spider-Man art heist. Okay. It took place at and forgive my pronunciation, the Musée des Arts Moderne, which is in Paris. Where
the Modern Art Museum?
Yeah. It's basically,
What is it?
It's known as MAM, M-A-M.
Okay.
It's actually known as that.
Like MoMA, like we have the Museum of Modern Art.
Yeah. And it's this was in Paris, and essentially, 5 paintings that were worth millions of dollars were stolen overnight back in 2010.
2010.
Yeah.
Damn. There's a lot of technology in 2010 to be pulling off art heists.
And that's why I was like, you're not far off, because you mentioned Mission Impossible, and I thought of technology, and I'm like, This motherfucker was getting it done. And again, don't do crime, folks, but he was getting it done in the modern era. And that's why I'm like, well, you're not far off.
Yeah.
But yeah, the robbery was done by a man named Viren Tomic, however you want to pronounce it, who went to great lengths to break into museums. We're going to get into how he did it.
He did this to multiple museums? Okay.
No, he did it to one, but it's just one. He did it. I mean, in terms of this one, this is the one where he stole the most paintings.
Okay.
But he went through great lengths to break into those museums by scaling the walls of the building. Hence the reason they named it the Spider-Man heist. Like, he was able to pull off improbable shit by avoiding state-of-the-art security system that included motion detectors.
What is he got? Suction cups? And he's like, I just picture like those corny ass up the wall, on the glass.
he managed to dodge all of these things at the second largest museum in France next to the Louvre, So
yeah.
He was already known to have a criminal past involving elaborate robberies. So again, this was his biggest. This was his creme de la creme here. I'm just going to give a little backstory on all of that. And once we get into the true details of that robbery, Lisa, you're going to be like, get the fuck out of here. You're going to think this is a movie, and it might as well be. I don't know why we haven't made a movie on this. So yes, the Musée d'Art Moderne, which is in Paris, the MAM, it was established back in 1961 and is one of 14 city museums in the city of Paris.
Okay.
The museum is home to contemporary and modern art from the 20th and 21st centuries, which includes artworks by famous artists from that time, such as Pablo Picasso, Henri Matisse, George Renault, and Jean Metzinger. It mostly highlights artwork from the European and international art scenes from the 20th century, with over 15,000 pieces of artwork from that period alone.
Wow.
Yeah. Because it's one of the largest museums in France that brings in hundreds of thousands of visitors every year, they've invested heavily in security for the building to avoid people stealing their valuable artwork.
Oh, good idea.
And here's the thing, we've had previous art heists. Like I told you guys about the Boston one and the St. Patrick's Day one. I told you about that one. Like they skimped on cost. They didn't have real security systems. But make no mistake, this museum has state-of-the-art security on all levels. This is not. Yeah, I just want to preference that. However, on May 20th. 2010, a man by the name of Viren Tomic was able to successfully break into the building at night and steal 5 pieces of artwork worth over 100 million euros. So Tomic was born in Paris in 1968 to Bosnian immigrant parents, but was sent back to live with his grandmother in a Bosnian town called Mostar when his mother became very sick just a few years after he was born.
That's a different world, Bosnia to France.
Correct. So from a young age, he was always a mischievous child, getting into trouble and tormenting his cousins by putting thorns in their shoes.
Oh, that's not nice.
And it's such a specific thing. It's like,
so
what made him think?
Yeah, well, and that's like really just mean. It's not like he was just like poking fun at them or whatever,
He was relishing in it. He's just like,
that's
you got
premeditated.
thorns.
You know what I mean? Like, you got to go and plan that shit.
But again, yeah, it's premeditated. You're a kid and you're doing thorns. This is already paving the way for a unique criminal, we'll put it that way.
Been practicing since a young child.
Yeah, seriously. Like, that's just crazy. He would do that to their shoes, and then he became very skilled at scaling the local stone bridges in his town and jumping from the top of them into the river.
He's like, parkour.
Yeah, he was parkour before that. At the age of 10, he pulled off his very first heist when he broke into a library by climbing through the window at 10 feet above. That was 10 feet above the ground, and he stole 2 books.
What?
guy just had a knack for climbing and shit, and he started working automatically a life of crime with
Jeez.
climbing.
Well, I mean, if that's your only set of skills, what else are you gonna do?
Again, don't do crime, folks. But yes, he returned to Paris when he was 11 to live with his parents that he barely knew and didn't speak a word of French at the time. So imagine being thrown back into that and you know nothing. Before the infamous heist, he had already been honing his parkour skills as a teenager in the city's largest graveyard, Père Lachaise, which was the final resting place of Oscar Wilde and Jim Morrison.
Yeah.
He would scale the fucking roofs of the mausoleums and jump from one to another with his friends to show off his acrobatic skills. Ironically, he wanted to become a painter growing up, but his father thought of it as more of a hobby and told him to get a real job, even pressuring him to work at his garage.
Have you ever been to a cemetery that's like that, like crazy mausoleums and obelisks and stuff? I mean, they're super cool. Like on a tangent, if you ever go to St. Louis, there's one called Bellefontaine, and it's the coolest fucking cemetery I've ever been to. And like all like the, you know, Anheuser-Busch and all the rich folk of the Mississippi in the old days are buried there, and they got some cool mausoleums. But first of all, what possesses a person to do that? To just, it's like desecrating a grave. You're jumping across buildings that dead people are in.
Yeah, and you're doing it with a bunch of your friends. You're just like, this is perfect height elevation. Let's parkour over here.
Dude, the parkour thing makes me laugh so hard. Parkour. Sorry, I'm fading.
No, you're good. You're good.
And to come to a country, to parents you don't know. Right?
So language you don't speak.
For a language you don't speak. And if he's Bosnian immigrant, he looks very different than everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
That is a very isolating experience. So
exactly. He fits in where he fits in, and his friends are all doing parkour, and he's probably, you know, trying to outdo them. So they like him, they appreciate him more. Not justifying anything he's done, but eventually,
every time you say parkour, I laugh. Just so you know, I can't help myself. I'm like a 5-year-old. When you say like penis or something, I just keep giggling every time you say parkour. It's a stupid word.
Eventually, he fled home as a teenager and began squatting at an abandoned warehouse with his friends where, you know, they would steal glassware from a local factory nearby and then sell them in a flea market. Like they were already doing organized stuff.
Right.
Over time, he started to rob apartments in affluent, you know, neighborhoods in Paris as his climbing skills continued to improve. He would look for expensive jewelry because they were easy to sell, and he was basically able to live off that money for nearly 6 months for doing only 2 hours of work during the robbery.
Wow.
He would just be scaling up houses and windows, taking his shit out, piecing out.
It's 2 hours, 6 months. I mean, it's worth the risk.
Yeah. He prided himself on being able to evade the authorities and avoided getting caught for his robberies for a long period of time. So he was just out here again, just climbing up shit.
Do we know how old he is around this time? He's like a teenager?
He's a teenager around this time. One night in May 2010, he was walking along a river known as the Seine or Seine. Forgive me for mispronouncing. When he noticed a cubist painting on the wall inside a building that caught his attention. He later learned that the building was the Mom, you know, in Paris, and approached it to identify where the cameras were located.
He's like, oh, interesting.
Yeah, he's like, let's take a look at this camera. He's like, I think I found my new golden egg here. Yeah. After scouting the location, he noticed that one of the window frames was similar to a building that he had robbed in the past and that he could easily break in if he wanted.
No way.
A few days later, he entered the museum as a visitor to observe the artwork he could potentially steal and noticed the motion detectors that were in place inside the museum. So he went in there to scout the joint, and he's like, "Oh shit, they got motion detectors." All right,
he's like, "All right, let me
taking his notes,
crack his knuckles here, and see what he's got in his bag of tricks. How he can evade all these things."
I just picture him seeing the sensors, and he's like, this is fine art. And like someone next to him's like, oh, you like this painting too? Oh, yes, the painting. Yeah, that's the fine art.
Correct. Yes.
So yeah, before he proceeded with the robbery, he had already identified a buyer for the artwork he was planning to steal.
Smarter than half the other idiots we've talked about in our
I was just
lives.
going to say that. He had a steady business relationship with a man named Jean-Michel Corvez, who he met in 2004 through another thief and had sold over 90,000 euros in contraband to him before the heist.
Damn.
So, yeah, this guy was already
He's a lifer criminal.
Yeah,
he's only ever been a criminal.
Correct.
Wow.
And it's always been a part of like a well-oiled organization or transit. Like
Right.
he knows what he's doing.
Well, and he's gone his whole life without getting caught. He hasn't done any jail time up to this point, and all this stupid shit he's done. Crazy.
Corvez was the one to give him the nickname, I don't know how to pronounce it, Arachne, which is French for spider. Yeah, Arachne, because of his ability to scale walls. He gave him the nickname Spider. Not long after he had visited the Mom Paris, Corvez reminded Tomic that he wanted to add some artwork from Fernand Ledger to his collection. And Tomic knew that one of his paintings, was in the museum. It was the one known as Still Life with Candlesticks.
Huh.
Less than a week before the robbery, Tomic had already begun dabbing the window with paint stripping acid to help expose the heads of the screw to the window frame.
Shut the fuck up.
I told you.
Hold
I was
on.
like, we're going to get to some real shit.
So he was meticulously exposing the window frame over time.
You got to take it a step before that. The man was climbing to the window to strategically do that.
Oh my gosh. That's so nuts.
Undetected.
At night, I'm guessing
detected.
he's doing this over a period of days?
Essentially it was like over a period of it was a few days before, because it's like less than a week before the robbery.
Okay.
Yeah.
But that's like multiple times he's gone back to do this. What the fuck?
No one caught him. And this is the thing, like some of his robberies is not necessarily nighttime. It could technically be day that he's doing some of these. It's just the elevation. I feel like nobody's looking up in fucking Paris.
Interesting.
Or maybe they're thinking he's fixing shit.
Right,
and
he's supposed to be there. Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, he did
I'm
that.
always fascinated by people who have that much longevity in their process. Like, bull in a china shop is one thing, but when you can like plan out slow, meticulous bits of dropping acid on a screw head is fucking fascinating to me. Wow.
Paint stripping acid just to expose the screw. Yeah, that's crazy. When this was going to be like the finishing part of that statement. Like, he did that to expose the heads on the screw to the window frame, which he replaced. That's what I was getting at. That's why I was laughing, which he replaced with brown molding clay that matched the color. So he essentially used the acid to expose the screws. Then he took the screws out and he put the molding clay there to match the color.
So that no one would notice.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Wow. That's so detailed. Holy crap. Okay. Is he still a teenager at this point?
What am I saying? Because he was born in 68. So he is a grown. That's even more impressive. 68. So in 2010, what was he? Close to 40?
Oh my God.
Which makes it even more impressive that he's been doing this for.
He's 40 years old doing this crazy shit. And no one's noticing a 40-year-old man hanging off the side of a building.
That's fucking wild.
That's
wild. Fucking wild. And he's never been caught for. So I keep saying he's young because I'm thinking the crime itself is young, but he is not young.
Yeah, that's nuts.
So yeah, his whole life he perfected the art of crime. Yeah.
Listen, he's young-ish, okay? Let's not call 40-year-olds fucking old.
I mean, it's not old, but for him to be as acrobatic as he is to get things done like that.
Dude, I'm not scaling a fucking building. Are you? Do you have the capability of scaling a building?
I don't. And even if I did, that's a lot.
My husband has been talking about going to take rock climbing. Like, there's a rock climbing gym here.
Yeah.
So maybe he wants to go scale buildings. I certainly do not have it in me.
Yo, that shit's crazy. And for the record, it took him 6 days to complete that process with the acid and everything before he even performed the heist. And each time he went to work on the window frame, he had to avoid the patrolling guards.
And it's the same window frame for 6 days.
Well, a few. Yeah. Wow. And on the day of the heist, he returned to silently remove the window frame using suction cups. And that's why I laughed when you said Mission Impossible, because I'm like, well, yeah, you're not far off.
Okay.
Yeah, so he used the suction cups to remove the window frame, and he entered the museum briefly while avoiding the motion detectors.
No shit.
After entering, he fled briefly to the banks of the scene to see if it would trigger any alarms. But once he knew he had not done so, he returned 15 minutes later to finish the job, folks.
Hold on. So he went inside to see if anything would go off and then was like, hold up, let's test it. Put that shit back. Went to the riverbank and waited. And was like, I don't hear any cops.
Correct. And then he went back in.
No shit.
Correct.
He's one of the smartest hard heists that we have ever had on this show. And we've had like 4 now, at least?
We've had quite a few. We've had at least 4, and I'm like, a lot of these motherfuckers are just doing dumb things.
Yeah. I'm dying to know how he got caught. I can't wait to hear how he got caught.
Well, upon his return, he proceeded to steal 5 paintings.
Worth 100 million euros.
Yeah, which included Le Pigeon au Petit Pois, Pigeon with Peas by Pablo Picasso. And then it was La Pastorale by Henri Matisse. And then it was Olive Tree near Lestot by George Braque. Le Film, Woman with a Fan by Armando.
You don't have to read the French, my friend.
Yeah, thank you. Cool. It's a habit because some of them are, you know what it is? Some of them are only known by their French title, not the translation. I'm like, you guys can look at my notes. I'm going to have all my sources there.
Yes.
But if you're entertained by me butchering it, just
it's hysterical. I'm not saying stop. I'm just saying you don't have to.
But yeah, there was another painting as well. It was the still life with candlestick. It took him 2 trips.
No shit.
It took him 2 trips to move all the canvases that he stole out of the museum. So the man technically was in there 3 times.
3 times? What?
Yeah.
Oh my God. He is so confident. That's nuts. That's nuts.
Yeah.
Wow.
Or is it technically 4 times? Because he went in once as the test, he went out, he went back in again, then he took the paint. It's 3. But yeah, that's still crazy.
So do you know where he stash it in between the in and outs?
We might get there.
Okay.
We might get there. I might get there like this second. You'll see.
Okay. Shut up, Lisa.
Once he had all the paintings he wanted to take, he left the museum and fled. He took the Renault that he had parked a few minutes away. Wait, why?
It's a car, a Renault.
Okay, I'm making sure. But now I was thinking of the painter.
What's so fucking weird? You are not talking about a Renault right now.
A Renault, yeah.
Do you know that there is now a fucking Renault in my backyard?
Get the fuck out of here.
I swear to God, it got here last weekend.
The fuck?
Justin, get out of my brain. Holy shit. So here's a side story. My husband rebuilds old cars. And most of the time, they're all Volkswagens. He's got a YouTube show. It's called Lower Class Garage. Go check it out. But he fucking brought home a Renault last week, which is a French car. And you're talking about him parking a Renault down the block and he's putting...
Yeah,
so a Renault
once he had all the paintings.
Like a longer looking Volkswagen Bug, essentially.
That's hysterical. Yeah, because once he took the paintings, he left the museum and fled in his Renault that he had parked a few minutes away. It wasn't just like a block away.
Right.
So again, he's
just running with a bunch of
this guy's athletic as fuck, man. Like
it's perfect. Okay.
And
so
we
random.
never got full clarification on the aspects of him running. I don't know if he's running above buildings to get
Come
to his
on,
car.
you think that he's like
I'm
cat
assuming-
in a hot tin roof skipping across? Holy shit.
But he would later meet with Corvez at an underground parking garage later that morning, who was surprised to find that he had stolen 5 paintings from the museum instead of just the one painting he requested. So he gets there, he's like, here you go. And he just drops all the paintings in. This guy's
He's like, fuck, man, this is way more prison time. This is a lot more money you just stole.
So yeah, Corvez ended up taking the one off his hands, and then the one of the Modigliani's. But Tomik did not want to part ways with the 3 other paintings.
He was like, these are for me.
Yeah, these are my trophies. Here we go. So nevertheless, he asked Corvez to hold on to them for him. By the end of the day, the heist was all over the news, and the mayor of Paris at the time, Bertrand Delano, vowed to do everything in his power to recover the stolen artwork. He tasked the French elite armed robbery task force.
That is a name.
Well, the French version, I mean, looks so cool. I would just butcher it. But he recruited them to launch an investigation and found a witness not too long after. They questioned a young skateboarder by the name of Goran Radozovic, who said that he saw a strange man at the museum at night, observing the side of the wall with the windows to the museum. Not long after, the police found the removed screws of the window frame hidden neatly in the corner of the museum.
Okay, well, that seems stupid. Of all the smart things to do, that seems fucking stupid.
Yeah, that was very stupid. That was careless on his part. You left it neatly. You should have either just scattered the shit, threw it in the alley, or just get rid of it altogether. Tomik would return to Corvez Galley to collect his payment for the art and was given 40,000 euros in small bills stuffed in a shoebox. Afraid that he would be caught at his own apartment, he stayed at the apartment of an acquaintance who was a sex worker. Because, that's legal out there. So,
right. Fine.
It wasn't until... I'll wait till you finish your drink. I don't want you spitting it on that wonderful mic of you.
Okay. Appreciate it. Continue.
It wasn't until 6 months after the robbery that he was finally considered a suspect.
Shut the fuck up.
That's why I was like, for folks who can't see this, again, it's on our Patreon content. Lisa was like clearly drinking this cup, and I was like, it's going to go all over the screen, all over the mic.
6 months?
Before he was even considered.
Looked at? No way.
Yeah.
Are these cops just shit, or is he a genius?
I mean, he's kind of a genius because other than that, they had nothing on him.
Wow.
And they didn't know what his face looks like. He was up in the air, according to the skateboard kid. But yeah, it wasn't until 6 months they considered him a suspect, because it wasn't until when the police got an anonymous tip for a separate investigation where Tomik's name was brought up.
Okay.
So on October 1st, 2010, they tapped into his phone and heard him ranting about how the cops thought he was involved with the heist. The authorities ended up cross-referencing a photo of Tomik with the description that the skateboarder witness gave of the thief and concluded that they were a match. So the skateboarder gave some vague things about the looks. They have a photo from a previous crime where apparently he might have been involved in, and they had already got information on him for a previous crime now. So it's like worlds colliding.
It's... There's so many situations in true crime where they give you like a description from a witness and you're like, that drawing is garbage. Exactly. And like none of that makes any, that could be anyone and no one at the same time. But somehow they got it right this time just by fucking circumstance. Like it's probably just as shitty and shouldn't have worked in any other case. But they were right. So
it's too much.
I'm amazed that they even believed a skateboarder kid. Like usually
truth be told, I feel like they didn't. That's why it took 6 months. I was like, oh, that skateboarder kid, since somebody was up there, they're like, fuck it. But it wasn't. Again, they found screws neatly there. So then they were like, maybe skateboard kid's telling some of the truth, but they probably didn't believe his description to say anything. But yeah, they determined, like I said, that was enough to track his moves. And
so they tapped his phone, and he's stupid enough to freak out on the phone so they can all hear him.
Correct.
Idiot.
So, yeah, they determined that evidence was enough to track his move and all of that. So the law eventually caught up to Tamik
The law.
and his associates nearly a year after the heist, when they arrested Tomik after a raid on his apartment in May of 2011. During the investigations, he eventually confessed to the mom heist, along with other robberies that he did.
Oh my
that
goodness.
they didn't even know he did.
What is
They
wrong with these
used-
people?
Well, again, they probably was like, we already have you for one and now this. So
They're like, tell us about the rest of them. We'll go easy on you for these ones.
they used that information to arrest Corvez and a man named Jonathan Bryn, who was a watchmaker that helped Corvez hide the paintings.
Oh, so he chirped.
Yeah, I mean,
He chirped on
he
him.
did everything. At the conclusion of the trial in February of 2017, Tomik was sentenced to 8 years in prison and had to pay 200,000 euro fine for stealing the paintings. I'm sure he had that money stashed somewhere and could probably
Yeah.
pay that. Corvez was sentenced to 7 years in prison and had to pay a fine of 150,000 euros for storing them. And Bryn, the watchmaker, was sentenced to 6 years in prison and had to pay a fine of 150,000 euros for helping them store the paintings later on.
Interesting. Hope they weren't all in prison together. It's awkward.
Well, I was going to get at that. Remember, he didn't want to part with the 3 paintings, so clearly the watchmaker was holding that shit too.
Right.
In addition to the fines, the trio was also ordered to collectively pay 100 million euros in indemnification to the city of Paris, which was the approximate value of the paintings when they were stolen. The heist led to all 14 city museums increasing their security since the robberies occurred. To this day, they're still unsure about what ended up happening to the paintings that were stolen.
I was just going to ask you. They never
I knew you
fucking
were.
recovered them?
They say
You
that all or some of the paintings were either sold, destroyed, or still hidden somewhere, but no one knows for sure today.
Oh my God.
So again, don't do crime, folks. They got away with it.
Yo. So they got these 3 people in prison and they still don't fucking know where these paintings are.
Right. And it doesn't, I guess in their mind, it doesn't matter because all 3 of these people have to pay the prices of those paintings. But yeah, that's still crazy. That's still crazy.
That is crazy. I've never heard this story before. Wow.
We try to bring the arts sometimes to Crime of the Arts, and I have been going through quite a few art heists, but this shit right away, it caught me when it said Spider-Man art heist, because for me, I was like, what does that mean? I'm thinking somebody stole an autograph, someone did this, and then when I got into the research, I was like, oh my God, this guy.
He's literally a Spider-Man. He climbs things.
His life of crime finally caught up to him, but again, he was getting away with almost all of that shit.
It took him forever to make a mistake, you know? And I love that he didn't give up where the paintings were, but he gave up the people.
He gave up the people, and that's fucked up because they could have got away with it. You know, he could eventually could have got out of prison. He could have worked again with them, but he gave them up.
Don't do crime, folks.
Don't do crime, folks. Yeah, don't do it. But if you are going to do it, you just try to be organized, I guess. This is probably the most organized art heist we've given you thus far, without a doubt.
He's a pro. He's definitely not the animals.
So yeah, that is my story of the Spider-Man art heist.
I dig it. I dig it. So I want to plug the Patreon a little bit. We haven't really done that in a little while. So you can head over to patreon.com/Crime of the Arts podcast. If you would like to watch us record, we are pretty ridiculous humans and we respond accordingly to each other. And you will see how organic it really is for us to hear these stories from one another, because we are not lying. Like, we are just like, is your story about a murder or an art heist? So that we don't do the exact same thing. And then when we get together before we record, we're like, okay, how can we match these up? Because we usually batch record a little bit. But yeah, so go check it out. You can get tier 1. You get these episodes that you can watch, ad-free episodes. We'll leave the promos in for some of the podcasts that we've been working with, just so you can give them a listen, but there won't be any
behind
ads.
the curtain.
Ah, yeah, there it is. A peek behind the curtain. And if you go to the Don't Do Crime Folks level, that is $10 a month. We have, some little extras coming up. We're going to let you guys know about some maybe guests on the podcast. Maybe we'll give you a sneak peek in the regular feed of that, but most of those stories are going to be put on the Patreon. You'll also get a thank you card and some stickers. I actually ordered some new stickers. I didn't even tell you about this yet, Justin. There's going to be some merch available. So come and join us and check us out on patreon.com.
Check it out.
We do have a new website. Everything is available through that website. We're going to have a merch drop available. I haven't also told Justin about that either. So yeah, we got some new and exciting things coming. We're bringing you some fresh energy, and we hope you like it. And you keep coming back for more.
Stay tuned and, continue to follow us on all our social media pages, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, I was about to name every single Facebook. I mean, we have so many. But again, our new website, which looks so fucking amazing. Thank you, Jay.
Yeah.
Again, our new website streamlined. So it has our entire catalog up there, as well as all of our platforms and the Patreon. So, if you guys are ever looking for anything, you don't have to look for separate links. Now it's all together. It's all in one.
Yeah, hit our home base. And it's crimeoftheartspodcast.com.
When you look back at the history of the creative arts, it takes a lot of darkness to create the light the arts bring to the world.
Thanks for joining us this week. And if you enjoyed our conversation, please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and go over to Apple Podcasts to rate and review.
Please check out our sources listed in the episode notes. They're amazing.
And you can find us on Facebook and Instagram and all of the social platforms at Crime of the Arts Podcast.
We're looking forward to having you back next week. Until next time, peace out, everybody.
Peace out, everybody.